Hi, this is Tim Chrisman with the Foundation for the Future, here for Tim's Tuesday, where I get to talk about, because I'm Tim, whatever I want to talk about for about 5 minutes, because it happens to be Tuesday. Today I wanted to talk about a question that we at the Foundation continue to get about our proposal for a Space Infrastructure Development Corporation. If you want to find out more about our proposal, I'll put a link in the description, but in essence, we are advocating for the creation of a infrastructure development corporation chartered by the federal government in order to unlock patient capital for investment in space. The sort of simplest and most catchy way of explaining this is the federal government invests in infrastructure on land, air, and sea, and in cyberspace. Why not do the same in outer space? But the question keeps arising, why now? Why do we need to do this at all? And especially why, when we see billions of dollars being invested in space companies, new space companies being listed on exchanges, why should the federal government create a tool to invest in space infrastructure? And there are a number of answers to that. However, the most compelling two are that investment in space infrastructure is truly an investment in a sustainable pathway to jobs and sustainable economic growth. And the second is that the investment right now in the space economy is almost exclusively short-term. So getting to the first part of the answer, the jobs and economic growth, the space economy has a misconception about it that like the military, where money poured into it is just turned into bombs that are dropped and ultimately wasted. Space spending is spent on fancy probes that are then sent to faraway planets, and ultimately there is some sense that that is wasted. The truth of the matter is, while the end result of a lot of the exploration spending does get sent away, the technology used is then immediately turned around and converted into jobs and whole commercial ecosystems here on the ground, with that exploration device essentially being an early prototype. A great example of this is satellite communications. First done in the 1960s, the network was meant to control U.S. nuclear launches and enable the president to communicate. And ultimately, that has enabled everything from real-time video calls to long-distance phone and more. And so the upfront investment by the federal government in that sort of basic infrastructure was for its own selfish purposes, but ultimately we all benefited. And we benefited with better paying jobs and a clear pipeline into those good jobs. Ultimately, space is not somewhere where there are McDonald's and Starbucks right now. And so investment in space infrastructure and space economic development is really investments in material science, in manufacturing and engineering. These are all very real career paths here on the ground, very tangible and attainable educational goals for youth. And they aren't the science fiction jobs that we see in the movies, but they are the engine that drives the space economy and much of the U.S. economy. The second part of the first answer, is the economic growth. The space economy is a rapidly growing sector, and throughout its 60 plus year history, there have been interspersed federal investments in the sort of backbone infrastructure for space that ultimately enabled on the ground economic benefits. The two that are best known is GPS and commercial satellite communications. We already talked a little bit about the satellite communications. GPS is mentioned almost religiously when discussions are made about the viability and utility of federal investment in space. And though both of those sort of examples are showing that while infrastructure investment in general is considered a good use of federal dollars, returning about $1.50 for every $1 spent, these space infrastructure projects returned 2 to 5 times as many dollars to the economy as what was invested, indicating what is very evident when you think about it. Building new infrastructure always has larger benefits than repairing old. And when you are repairing existing infrastructure, that allows for a continuation of economic activity, whereas unlocking new potential happens on the edge. And so investments in space infrastructure enable just that sort of frontier unlocking benefit. The final part of the answer of why now is there is not investment tools on the market right now that enable long-term, so think 10 to 30-year investments in space infrastructure. The vast majority of money going into the space economy right now is federal, and this is based largely on a year-to-year budget cycle. Venture capital, which 5 to 7 years, and high net worth individuals. Yes, thinking about you, Elon and Jeff. And those two individuals are realistically the only two infrastructure investors in space. And absent that, there is a very clear gap between the sorts of tools used on the ground to finance infrastructure investments with hedge funds, pension funds, and others. And there's that lack because space is considered too risky an investment and outside the norm. That has essentially equated to a high volatility, high churn rate for investment on both the public and private sector. And our proposal seeks to remedy that gap while enabling the sustainable job and economic creation that I talked about. If you'd like to know more about our proposal for the Space Corporation, you can find it at www.f4f.space. And again, I'll drop a link to it in the description. And thanks. I look forward to seeing you next week and explaining then how, in fact, 9 minutes is the new 5 minutes. Take care.